For those of you who don't know me, my name's Ethan Woike. I moved from Alberta to Nanaimo when I was 10 with my younger sister and parents, and I've been attending Hammond Bay Church on and off since then. When Christian asked me to come up here to share my testimony, I was reluctant. In fact, I think I said not yet 3 or 4 times before eventually he got a yes out of me. Although I'd still prefer to be sitting down there with all of you, watching someone else speak, I feel blessed and honored to be able to share what God has done in my life in front of such a loving church family. I graduated in 2020 from the Nanaimo Christian School at the mercy of some very patient teachers. With the lowest attendance rate in my entire school during my grade 11 and 12 years, I was far from a model student. I had no real aspirations, no real direction, and no desire to be anything more than what I already was, lost. Here's my graduation photo with a quote from one of my teachers to give you an idea about what they thought about me finishing school. Yes, I thought it was a good idea to get a perm. For Ethan, overcoming significant hurdles and completing high school successfully can be seen as about the same as one of us climbing Mount Everest. Well done, Ethan. As you can see, my teachers were surprised I was able to finish the already light workload they required of me to graduate. Now, I won't go into every reason why I chose to rebel against God, but at the end of the day, the reasons don't matter. I kept going down that road mainly because I believed I was too far gone. I'd convinced myself that I had already ruined my life beyond repair, so what was the point in trying to fix it? And to be fair, I was too far gone. We all are. What I mean by that is that we need God's grace. But at 15, grace was the last thing on my mind. I'd already decided to stop trying in school, to give up on everything I'd once valued. Instead, I poured my energy into drugs and video games, numbing myself to any sense of purpose. It started with experimenting, but it didn't take long for that to spiral into full-blown addiction. Weed led to harder drugs, school became optional, pornography and hookups became a staple in my life, without a second thought about the damage they would cause my future marriage. By the age of 16, there was no balance at all. I'd fully given myself over to an all-or-nothing mentality. If I wasn't going to be the best student, then I decided that I would be the worst. I could stand here and give you the highlight reel of my worst mistakes, but I'll spare myself the embarrassment and my mom the pain of reliving what I put her through. To be honest, I don't remember much anyway. What I do remember are the mornings after a bender, waking up, saying I wanted to change, but knowing deep down that I wouldn't. I'd already failed so many times. Why would this time be any different? That was my high school life until the end of my grade 12 year during COVID. I remember waking up one afternoon, filled with the all-too familiar feelings of shame and depression from the life I was living. I was at rock bottom. Finally, I realized that no matter how badly I wanted to change, I couldn't do it alone. After not even giving a thought to God over the last few years, I suddenly remembered Him. I didn't just remember the idea of God, I remembered what He did for me. I remembered that Jesus had taken all my sin, my lies, blasphemy, lust, and pride, and paid my debt on the cross. I remembered that all I had to do to be forgiven was to believe and confess Jesus as my Lord and Savior. I dropped to my knees and cried for what felt like an hour, asking God for forgiveness and begging Him to save me from my drug addiction. For the first time in my life, I began to understand how foolish I had been. I finally saw the truth. I didn't need to fix myself. I just needed to trust in God. That was the beginning of my faith journey because that was the day I learned something invaluable. Lesson 1. God saves us when we call on His name. Romans 10:13 says, "For everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved." By God's grace, I'm over 5 years sober from hard drugs, and I haven't smoked weed in nearly 4 years. Fast forward a little over a year to 2021, I restarted attending Hammond Bay Church with my girlfriend, Sonia. We met at our first job out of high school, Panago Pizza. At the time, we were both still figuring out what we wanted to do with our lives. With no real sense of identity, we started to find our identity in each other. When we first started dating in 2020, we believed in God, but we didn't know Him. We had no relationship with Him, and we had kind of a half-baked idea of what it truly meant to follow Him. And our relationship reflected that. The choices we made, the way we treated each other, it was all shaped by sin. Over time, that sin led to pain. And it was the weight of that pain that first drove us through the doors of this church. I was unhappy, I was unfulfilled, and deep down, I knew something had to change. You might be thinking, Ethan, you got sober, what's the problem now? Well, that brings me to lesson 2. Our outward acts of sin are fueled by the inward rebellion against God in our hearts. Romans 1:24-25 says, "Therefore God gave them over in their sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity for the degrading of their bodies with one another. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie, and they worshipped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen." See, I had gotten sober, at least mostly. I still drank occasionally, but compared to my past, it was a night and day difference, with the drugs and partying gone. The problem was, my heart hadn't changed. I just replaced my old sins with new ones. I'd flipped my life upside down, changed my friends, and thrown myself into the self-help movement. I became obsessed with productivity, determined to make something of myself. I wanted to rewrite my story. We live on Vancouver Island, so naturally, I set my sights on real estate. I networked with agents, consumed endless podcasts and books, and before long, I passed my real estate exam, my first win in a really long time. My confidence was through the roof, but so was my pride. And once again, I started to feel empty inside. My relationship with Sonia was also suffering. Jealousy, anger, resentment, they ran rampant between us. Our communication was unhealthy, and we placed each other on a pedestal, making an idol out of the other person. I wanted to follow Christ. I wanted to submit my life to God, but deep down I was terrified. I was afraid that if I fully surrendered, I'd lose my life as I knew it. And so I lived in the middle ground. I knew the truth, but I wasn't really ready to embrace it. I still wanted to control my life, my future, and my relationship. Eventually, by God's grace, Sonia and I made a really big decision. We agreed to attend separate Torchbearers Bible schools in different parts of the world before I started my career in real estate. We hoped that some distance and a God-centered environment might somehow heal our broken relationship. But if I'm honest with you, I saw Bible school as an escape. A way to get away from the life I had created, the consequences of my choices, and the things that made me feel so stuck. I wanted God's help, but I didn't want His lordship. Here's the thing. By this time, I had started to figure out what following Christ required. It meant you were saved by grace and grace alone, but that you spent the rest of your life learning to walk in submission to God. I knew that following Jesus meant to lay everything down daily, and that was the last thing I wanted, because submission to God meant death to self. It meant giving up my dreams. It meant surrendering my desires. It meant walking away from the sins I loved. I liked the idea of what God was offering me, but I didn't think it was worth the cost. Jesus speaks directly to this struggle in Matthew 16:24-26. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will find it. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world and yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" That's a radical call. And when you're trapped in all or nothing thinking, it's easy to push back against it. I spent years caught in that tension. I trusted Jesus for salvation, but I couldn't trust him with my life on earth. Now back to my story. Because of how the school schedules worked out, I started my program in Greece while Sonia started hers in Costa Rica a few weeks later. At first, I thought the distance would help, but instead, our relationship began unraveling faster than ever. We fought constantly over the phone. Our jealousy, insecurity, and immaturity only worsened with the distance, and eventually, it became too much. We broke up. At first, it was hard, but then something started to happen. I started to feel relief. With space from my toxic relationship, I began to feel like myself again. I was regaining my confidence, investing in friendships, and finally letting go of the weight our relationship had placed on my life. The constant sin that had plagued us was gone, and without it, I felt lighter. But the truth, I hadn't changed. Now that I had no relationship to idolize, all I had was my goals. So I started to obsess even more about my plans for my life post-Bible school. I thought I had grown. I thought I had moved forward. And then I got a text from my mom. "Call me," she said. I could hear the despair in her voice as soon as she picked up. She braced me for hard news and then told me Sonia was pregnant. Just take a second to picture this. Sonia and I had just broken up. We were in different countries trying to move on, and now we were expecting a baby together. For someone who had built his identity on personal ambition, this was devastating, not to mention the shame I felt to find out my now ex-girlfriend was pregnant while we were both at Bible school. I was just getting over the breakup. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't imagine co-parenting in our toxic relationship, but I also didn't see a way for us to get back together, because even as we started texting and calling about the baby, we fought. I thought about adoption. I thought about escaping. But then, just like before, something started to happen in my hopelessness. It began pushing me towards God, which brings me to lesson 3. We cannot serve two masters. We have to choose one Lord of our life, God or ourselves. Matthew 6:24 says no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. For the first time in my life, I truly saw that without submission to God, my life was hopeless. I'd tried to be Lord of my own life, and all I'd done was make the wrong decisions again and again. My selfishness and pride had dug me deeper into a hole, and the only way out was to submit my life to the lordship of Jesus Christ. I see now that this baby, our baby, was God's greatest act of grace in my life, besides Jesus' death on the cross. Proof that he redeems what we think is beyond repair. By God's grace, and with the help of some amazing friends and family, Sonia and I worked on a relationship, and we chose to be together. We got married and welcomed our wonderful gift into the world. We're continuing to trust God's leadership as we walk together through the first years of being parents, and continue to rely on God to see how he wants to work through our story. So I want to ask you all, what is your cross? Jesus says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. This is not a call to perfection and submission to God without fault, but it is a decision to make the daily choice to choose God's way over yours, despite constantly messing up. It's a call to repeatedly draw from the bottomless well of grace that is offered, to turn away from your sinful desires and align yourself with God's desires instead. What does that look like for all of you? Church history tells us that most of the 12 apostles were martyred. They were called to give their very lives for the sake of the gospel. That's not a call for many of us, if any of us. However, when we choose to follow Jesus, life is full of calls to submission. They will most likely change in our different seasons of life. For Matthew the tax collector, it meant quitting his lucrative job and turning from his life of greed to a life of charity. For Simon the Zealot, it meant surrendering his rebellion to trust in God's kingdom. For me, it meant surrendering the life I thought I wanted. It meant choosing not to pursue real estate and instead taking a stable job that could support a family right away. And it meant coming home and trusting God to heal our broken relationship as me and Sonia learned to walk in submission to him and each other. What is God calling you to submit to him? Because I promise you this, whatever you think you're losing is nothing compared to what you will gain. Right now, our daughter Elsie is 2 years old, and I'm sure I don't need to tell you all that trusting God was the best decision I could have made. I'm beyond blessed to be a husband to Sonia and a father to Elsie, and we are thrilled to be welcoming a new baby boy into our family in less than a month. My life has never been more full of love and joy than it is now, and I gained it all by choosing to let it go. Thank you all so much for listening. My closing prayer. Do I pray? Father, thank you for today. Thank you for just allowing me to be up here, and what a blessing it is to be able to just speak in front of this wonderful church family. And I just, I pray that you bless the rest of our day, God.